to another in the series of Café Insights. I'm Andrew Vine, CEO of the Insight Bureau, and today I'm in conversation with Caspar Berry.
Hello.
Well, we're not exactly in a cafe, we're actually in a champagne bar at St Pancras Station.
Europe's longest champagne bar.
Is it really?
That's its claim.
Okay. I wanted to take this opportunity just to have a chat to you and share a little bit more with everyone about the kind of things that you do as a speaker.
Right.
I find it a little difficult to know exactly how to introduce you because you're known as the guy who spent 3 years as a professional poker player. That's your claim to fame.
Yes.
But what you actually do, and why I want to interview you today, is to understand what you really achieve when you get to speak to audiences and what kind of difference you make to people.
Yeah, people always ask me how I want to be credited on my badge, and I never really know what to put, because most people are a doctor of something, which I'm not, or I don't know, they've climbed Mount Everest. So yes, I'm the poker guy, but as you say, for me the work extends way beyond that. It's what poker has to tell us about the way that we take risk and make decisions. When you're playing poker professionally, as I did for 3 years in Las Vegas, you are making a decision every 90 seconds. A decision that you can't abdicate, you can't delegate, you can't procrastinate, you have to make it.
Yeah.
And doing that 10 hours a day for 3 years just makes you very aware of that meta process, because you're not, trying to remember someone's phone number or arranging a meeting for 11 o'clock. You are just making the decision and pushing chips across the green bays. And the second thing you're doing, because obviously these two things are one and the same essentially, is you're taking a risk, or not, every 90 seconds. And so it just made me very aware of that process, and what I've tried to do in the last 10 years as a speaker is to bring that awareness to bear on people who very often don't think about the process.
Because when you talk about risk, if you say the word risk, a lot of people think that's a negative thing.
Yeah.
But if you take no risks in your life, you'll achieve absolutely nothing. You have to take some risks, but they need to be measured.
Yes, I think that's changing.
Yeah.
I think in the immediate aftermath of the financial crisis, risk became a dirty word. The level of debate around the subject just became so remedial. It was very frustrating for anyone who knew anything about it. There was a positive legacy, which was that at least it put risk on the agenda, and I think it made uncertainty, the concept of uncertainty, much more conceivable and applicable and relevant to people's lives. Once people realised the money in their current account wasn't actually 100% safe, they went, oh, well, maybe uncertainty does affect me. Yeah. But then I think there was a second legacy, which was 2, 3, 4, 5 years later. Once people realised that the old normal is not going to come back, the realisation that, okay, risk is something that we do have to take because change is now necessary. In fact, I was in an organisation just this week who, by their own admittance, had spent 7 of the last 8 years writing process and procedure like there's no tomorrow, and want to spend the next 3 years smashing them up. And although they're doing it very explicitly, I think actually implicitly a lot of companies are in the same place.
I mean, taking risks is very much part of what you must do as a leader. And as a leader, it's about making the right decisions at the right time with the right information that you have.
Absolutely. Whenever we're making a decision, we're taking risk. I mean, listen, let me just start by saying I am absolutely not advocating that people take risk willy-nilly. Okay? In fact, we should always be minimising the amount of risk that we should take. Okay? Start from that premise. However, when do you want to take risk? Actually, it's quite simple, is when you want to increase your ROI, your return on investment. Risk, investment, resource allocation, these are all part of the same conversation. And what are you doing as a leader if not ultimately managing the resource allocation of your company? From your own personal time, which is incredibly valuable, to the thousands, millions of pounds, maybe more in budget that you're allocating. So what I'm talking about is we take risk in order to increase our returns, and because that is a continual struggle, we are continually taking risk.
And of course, we're human beings, so we're not machines, and so there is a balancing between making rational decisions and reacting emotionally to situations.
Yes, there's that. There's also a couple of paradoxes within us. If you think about Maslow's pyramid of needs, right down at the bottom we have safety, security, shelter, a need for certainty. Right at the top we have self-actualization, a need to fulfill our potential. And when do we get that if not from jumping out of the aeroplane, going for the promotion, setting up our own organisation, moving into a new market? Within individuals, some people are hardwired to be quite risk averse, and communities, societies and organisations needs them. As a Premiership football manager once said to me, Caspar, I need those people, they're called defenders. And some people are more hardwired to take risk, to go out there, to try the new and different. These people were the pioneers. They found the new sources of food. They left the cave They did different things. They found the better way of doing something. They're almost like mutations in a gene pool, if you like. And our societies wouldn't have thrived without them. So there's definitely a balance, and I acknowledge that in my work. And sometimes that's called risk management. That's actually a phrase that I don't use because it conjures up such unbelievably dull images that it kills the conversation.
Yes.
But that is ultimately what we're doing. We're managing risk, but I like to say we're embracing taking or eschewing risk in order to create the best returns on the investments that are appropriate to the level of risk that we feel comfortable with.
I've seen you speak a couple of times, and I love the way you talk in stories and use humour to get the message across. The key is that there are very important messages that come through. So you've been able to provide speeches at conferences, but also briefings for organisations as well, which is what people don't see.
Yeah, there's two forms of speaking, I think, really, and I enjoy them both, but they're very different. One of them actually draws on my skills as a screenwriter from the early part of my career, because constructing a speech, I think, is about structure, and then actually I draw on my skills as an actor in terms of performance, and I do see it very much as a performance rather than just delivering a series of ideas with highs and lows and crescendos that, yes, make people laugh and deliver an emotional response, because I think ultimately that's what an audience craves and certainly I think deserves. But then, as you say, there's the content, and for me, almost like the second part of it is the Q&A, which is where we say, okay, that was great, but what does it mean? And it's where we get under the skin of it, and it's where audiences will ask me questions that will range from actually raw questions about poker, from which I think there's a great deal of learning to be had, to questions about application, which I spent the last 10 years doing.
You've done a lot of work with organisations led by their leadership development departments. This is very much part of helping organisations equip their people to be more effective in their roles.
Yes, I tend to work with senior people in an organisation because, as you said, risk is a leadership issue, really. Once you move away from health and safety and sort of ground floor, factory floor issues, risk is all about, the decision makers of an organisation. And I guess what I try and do is, I don't, and I'm sort of proud of this really, I don't have any simple acronyms. I'm not going to come into an organisation, in fact very specifically, I'm not going to come into any organisation and say what they should be doing. Some speakers do, and I completely respect that, because they have a certain, 5-point plan that's pulled out of the case and you can apply it to an organisation. That's great. What I'm trying to do actually is give that team more of a framework, more of a calibrated language, and more awareness of what they're really discussing, so that they can discuss that issue to produce results. Because if they don't have that, risk is the subject that is swept under the carpet, as we said, this hot potato, let's not talk about it. Well, no, let's talk about actually how much risk and in what way and in what cases we're prepared to embrace in order to bring about the returns that we say we want to achieve.
And in organisation, you must see quite a spread of some companies which culturally are very different from others, that may encourage or discourage people being more assertive in their roles, making their own decisions based on good judgment. I'm thinking also, because I come from Singapore, you think culturally different parts of the world are embracing this in a different way.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, listen, culture is huge, isn't it? And you can enter companies and just, they have completely different feels, there's no doubt about it. But I'll tell you what's interesting. Almost every individual and every company bar two that I've ever worked with describes themselves as risk averse, both the individuals and the company. And almost every individual I've ever worked with describes the company that they work for as too risk averse. So that there is a certain universality here, because of course most people want more latitude to make decisions than a company allows them. And I think there's a very specific reason for that. It comes back to my point earlier on, which is, of course, most companies should be minimising the level of risk that they're exposed to in all its different forms. One end, physical harm, but reputational damage, loss of all its different kinds. That's fine. Risk aversion is a good thing. Here's the interesting thing. Take someone like James Cracknell, who's a former Olympic gold medalist for Britain, who now does crazy things in his life. I mean, he rows across the Atlantic, he walks to the South Pole. When you ask him why he does these ostensibly very risky things, his answer is very interesting. He says, because I don't want to get to 65 and regret not doing them. Now, what that means is that he's doing these things, he's motivated out of a form of risk aversion. He doesn't want the pain, the agony of regret. And so in order to avoid that, he does these extraordinary things. And what that shows is that actually we are all risk averse. None of us like pain, but the way in which that manifests itself through our decisions is different for each individual and each organisation.
And there's a lot of pressure for companies now to be doing things differently. Innovation is the key driver because opportunities may be harder to achieve without doing something a little different.
Absolutely, and I think this is obviously precipitated by two things. First of all, we can broadly agree there is an accelerating pace of change in our society now. But I think also something else, markets tend toward efficiency. Markets are just becoming more and more efficient. How on earth do you differentiate yourself in markets which are just becoming more and more homogenous? You know, as Seth Godin says, you know, you hire a car now, it's fine. All hire cars are fine. And there was once a day when you wanted to avoid certain brands. That just doesn't happen now. So how are you going to create competitive advantage, which is obviously the source of your return on investment? There's a strong synergy actually between what I talk about and Blue Ocean strategy, which is you have to make a move into a place that requires some degree of risk. And here's the key. It's very, very important to make this point. Risk will involve some degree of failure. A lot of organisations think that they can do the holy grail of embracing risk, but not endure any short-term failure along the way. And that is actually impossible because that's what the notion of risk requires. So it's about understanding that in order to create that competitive advantage and that point of difference, whether through innovation or a number of other different processes, risk and the attendant short-term but managed failures are essential.
Fascinating. I mean, you have a very, very busy schedule. You're flying all over the world. It's great that we had a little bit of time to get together today. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
When are you coming to Asia next?
July. Yeah.
Okay, well, I hope to see you in Singapore.
Great.